Subject to financing is not a way to create wealth for 99.9% of people, but probably not for the reason you think. In this video, I'm going to go over the pros and cons of subject to financing. I'm going to compare that with the BRRRR strategy. I'm going to talk about when to use which one and which one is the best if you want to create financial freedom. So what is subject to? Well, in a nutshell, it's taking over somebody else's loan. You can do this with a house, a car, or even a business. If somebody has a loan on an asset, you can take ownership of that loan and therefore ownership of that asset. While the loan's still going to be in whoever originated its name, you get to own that asset. Sounds pretty cool, but when I go over kind of the nuances of it and compare it to the BRRRR strategy, I think you'll see some holes. If you're looking to buy a house and somebody has a loan and therefore a mortgage payment on that house, what you can do is convince that seller to deed the property, which means give ownership over to you and sign documents and have them trust you that you're going to make the payment on their behalf. You starting to see a little bit of holes already? The BRRRR method is a little more complex with a few more steps, and it's a way to buy real estate using other people's money. What you do is you borrow money to buy a distressed property. Next, you rehab that property using somebody else's money as well. Then you get the property rented to start to produce income. Then you refinance at a small local bank. They'll write you a check for up to 80% of the appraised value of that property. Remember, you bought it and fixed it up, so the value went up substantially. And you take that check and you pay back your initial lender that you borrowed the money from to buy it and to fix it up from. And now you owe the bank money in the form of a mortgage. No big deal. The rent pays a mortgage every single month, all the while you own that property. And this works for pretty much any distressed property as long as it cash flows. Let's talk about some pros of subject to financing. One pro is you can pay more for a house or a car or a business than you could if you were just going to pay cash or borrow money to buy it. That makes it more likely for the seller to sell you the property because you can pay more, assuming you convince them to do the subject to route. Another pro is no credit, no cash, or no credentials are needed, meaning you don't always have to put cash into the deal. Also means your credit score is not going to be run because the original person took out that loan, their credit score was ran to get the loan, and they're giving responsibility of those loan payments over to you, so your credit score doesn't have to be ran. And credentials, you don't need a W-2 income or to qualify for a loan. All right, let's get on to the cons of subject to financing. I heard somebody say this the other day, and this is actually a very, very big compliment to Pace, but this person told me that he thinks that there are more people interested in subject to than subject to properties available. Now, that's probably not accurate, and I may hear some backlash on that, but the point is there are not near as many subject to opportunities out there as traditional BRRRR deals or buying distressed properties at a discount, paying cash with somebody else's money. Pretty much anybody will gladly take cash if they agreed upon a price to buy their house. There are simply not as many people that are in the situation or that understand the concept of subject to financing to make it a viable option to actually scale and create massive wealth, especially in one area. I own 285 rental properties in St. Louis that I bought over the past several years using the BRRRR method. I would not be able to own near as many properties in this market if I was trying to do subject to. Another con is you have to garner trust from that seller. They have to trust and deed you over the property that you're going to make those payments because technically they are on the hook for those payments. Now it can be done and it is done, but just generally thinking, would you like to go approach a seller and say, I'm going to give you cash for this property and you're done, or I'm not going to give you any cash for this property. Give me ownership of the property and put me in charge of making the monthly payments. I promise that I'll make them. And the biggest con, in my opinion, is there's little to no equity when you buy property subject to. I've actually heard Pace say this in his videos, that he's willing to pay a lot more or pay around market price as long as the property cash flows. Again, not the end of the world if you manage it properly, but it's a scary place to be if there's a huge market dip. Every single property I buy, I have 25 to 30% equity from day one, meaning the market can drop 25%. I would still not be underwater. If you're owning a lot of property subject to, you don't have to be a sales guru to get the property. You just say, here's your all cash offer, close in 2 weeks, take it or leave it. Pretty simple sales pitch. Huge pro of the BRRRR method is you're buying the property and then rehabbing it. So you're able to rent out and maintain freshly rehabbed properties. If you're using subject to, unless you want to use your own cash, you're taking a property whatever condition the seller sells it to you. While that's not the end of the world, it might be decent condition. If I have a house listed for rent that's freshly rehabbed and you have a house that's been lived in and that's not rehabbed and maybe a little bit of dirty and outdated and they're the same rental price, the best tenants are going to choose my property. So I'm going to get better tenants that take better care of the property, that pay on time, and that stay longer. while there's probably good tenants that will rent subject to properties, I'd rather have the fixed up property, plus the maintenance is not going to cost you near as much. You just rehab the entire property, or at least most of it, and you took care of all the maintenance issues in the rehab. With subject to, who knows what maintenance issues are behind the walls or underneath the tile or what's done with the roof. If you don't want to spend any money, you're going to have to take the project as is, and then you will probably be doing more maintenance trips, which will cut into cash flow. All right, let's be fair here and let's talk about the cons of the BRRRR method. There are definitely more steps in the BRRRR method. Again, subject to is just basically taking over a loan and a deed, and there's definitely a few steps involved, but it's usually not that bad, assuming you can convince the seller and assuming that the deal even makes sense for the seller to do that. With the BRRRR method, you do have to find distressed properties, you do have to rehab it, you got to get it rented, which is similar with subject to, and then you have to get it refinanced. So there's a couple more steps in there, but if you follow me on all the social media platforms, especially here on YouTube and my podcast, The Faster Freedom Show, you will learn a bunch of hacks to make it not that big of a deal. I have over 1,200 students that own over $200 million in real estate utilizing the BRRRR method. So it does work. It's not that complicated. It's actually pretty simple once you understand it, but it does take some repetition. Another con would be you do probably have to use a little bit of your personal credit at first. But again, you don't have to use it forever, and you can just partner with somebody with decent credit. I have students do this all the time. They partner on a couple of deals with an older sibling or a parent. They utilize their hard work, their knowledge, and then they utilize somebody else's or a partner's credit for just a little bit to get a few deals approved. Then they fix their personal credit and they continue to partner with that person, or they separate, or they part ways at that point. Either way, it's an obstacle that's not as big of a deal as you would think. I think subject to is a great tool to have in your tool belt. I think it's a decent way to invest, and you can buy some deals with subject to financing. But again, if you want to scale and buy a lot of properties, enough to create financial freedom for you, enough to create massive wealth and have equity, which is where wealth is created. Wealth is created through equity and assets. Subject to can get you cash flow rich, but it's going to take a while to get you asset and equity rich. Nothing against Pace. He's the man. He's got a brain that I envy, and he's a super smart dude. Subject to financing is a great option. To me, a more stable and a bigger foundation to set to build freedom and to build financial success is the BRRRR method and investing in real estate in a little more traditional ways. Like most things, use them both. When a specific deal calls for a subject to, go that route, but you're not going to come across as many as you probably think. The more traditional way of investing and not trying to reinvent the wheel is buying distressed properties and creating equity through that. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, give it a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button. See you on the next one.